Alrighty, y'all. So today we're going to talk about increasing the probability of behaviors that you want to see more of. And if you want to follow along, just pull out Interpersonal Effectiveness handout number 20. So when we think about increasing behavior, we have two main strategies at our disposal. The first is to reinforce. And a reinforcer, simply put, is any consequence that increases the frequency of a behavior. And we know that all human beings and quite frankly, all living things are influenced by the consequences of their behavior. And reinforcers, things that increase behaviors like rewards, are particularly strong determinants of future behavior. And shaping just refers to the specific strategy of reinforcing any small step towards the behavior that you want to see. So let's talk a little bit more about reinforcement. Reinforcement is effective whether or not the individual understands the connection between the reinforcer and their behavior. And this is a common misunderstanding that can be helpful to clarify here that while you do need someone to understand and experience the reinforcer as reinforcing, they don't need to understand kind of at a cognitive level what the relationship is between the reward they're receiving and the behavior that they're doing or their likelihood to do that behavior again in the future for reinforcement to be effective. So you might think of any case, say, where you had to train an animal to do a behavior more in the future that even if they don't understand, can't watch this video and understand the principles of reinforcement, it's still really effective to give them a treat after every time you see a desired behavior that you want. And we also have likely reinforced others' behavior and had our own behavior reinforced many times over already without even realizing that we were doing it or that the other person is doing it. So, on some level, this is all pretty intuitive and instinctive. And it's easy to usually pull up some quick examples in your own experience. So, say if every time your kiddo has thrown a tantrum or say, engages in a certain behavior, you give them what he or she wants, you likely see whatever that behavior was, say those tantrums, go up in their frequency and intensity over time. And reinforcement is really the most effective way to increase behavior. While we might have urges or thoughts and desires to use other strategies to try to increase the behaviors we want to see in ourselves and in others. Say, we might have learned that negative self talk and kind of being really critical and harsh with ourselves might motivate us. We know that ultimately reinforcement, praise, and reward tends to be the most stable, efficient, and effective way of increasing a behavior that we want to see more of. And sometimes this question comes up, this idea like, shouldn't people just know what to do? Shouldn't they know what is right? Shouldn't they know what I want? It seems obvious or so right to me. Um, and to that, we'll emphasize that kind of all behavior, right, as we talk about in the beginning of DBT, all behavior is caused, meaning all behavior is learned. And indeed, as we've spoken about with the fast skill and kind of sticking to values, preferences, and desires tend to differ across people. So it can be really, really critical if we want to be effective at increasing behavior to drop any assumptions that might come up or beliefs around kind of people should know what to do and to focus instead on reinforcing what is personally valued and desired because that's most likely to really get you to the goal here of increasing behavior. All right, so two key types of reinforcement to keep in mind. We've got positive reinforcement, which involves any sort of positive consequence, or otherwise said, kind of adding something that's rewarding. And that might be praise, a smile, a hug, money, or monetary rewards. You can think a little bit more, even if you pause for a second, like, what are things that I genuinely find enjoyable or pleasant to receive? Um, and then negative reinforcement, importantly, this can be a really confusing term, but just means the removal of anything negative. So, in negative reinforcement, you're increasing the likelihood of a behavior by taking away something that's experienced as aversive or negative. So, some examples include, say, like taking pain medication like aspirin when you have a headache. When that migraine goes away, it reinforces the likelihood that you'll take that pain medication again in the future if you have a headache. And another example here is kind of the reinforcement, say, of alcohol use or avoidance when it effectively maybe takes down in the short term some fear, anxiety, or stress, that we might be more likely to engage in alcohol use or avoid things, even if they're important to us, because of that really powerful negative reinforcement effect. All right, so a little bit more on shaping. Shaping involves the reinforcement of small steps that lead towards the ultimate goal, the ultimate behavior you'd like to increase. And it requires a bit more kind of reinforcement gradually over time. So you want to make sure that as the person starts to engage in the behavior or components of the behavior that you'd like to see, you kind of make the bar higher and higher for what is required to get that reward, and continue that essentially until you reach the goal behavior, which may or may not be quickly, but the goal here is to kind of persistently stick with it, keep rewarding, and then make it harder and harder to get the reward until you get to the goal. And here it is so important to be mindful of the instinct to punish when the desired behavior isn't fully observed. So, a good example, something that definitely has come up for me, is say you really want a partner or a roommate to clean the kitchen, and that's what you've asked them to do. And they do the dishes, but then they leave kind of all the stuff out on the counters. They don't sweep the floor. They miss a couple of the chores that you really had wanted them to do. There can be a strong urge in that moment to kind of engage in some more punishing behaviors because they didn't do the full thing that you had asked or wanted, and kind of criticize them or complain to them. And in kind of a shaping framework, that would actually be the opposite of what we'd want to do, because that would make it an aversive experience that they did the dishes. Whereas what we want to do is kind of praise and reinforce that initial step of like, I really loved how you helped out with the dishes. And then, kind of as we continue over time to make the bar higher and higher to get that praise or that reward. So we get closer and closer to the full kitchen being cleaned. All right. A couple final pro tips around reinforcement. So, immediate reinforcement is going to be the most effective. And that's just with this idea in mind that the reinforcer has to be really kind of clearly and closely linked to the thing that it is reinforcing. Otherwise, it's easy for this effect to get muddled or kind of muddied. And at first, you're really going to want to reinforce every instance or step towards the desired behavior. And this shows up especially with littles and animals, where kind of the progress towards some of these more complex behaviors, say potty training or um, certain like complex social norms and social behaviors, is really tough. There's a lot of component parts. So we really want to make sure that reinforcement is consistent to begin with. So it's really clear what is desired and there's motivation to continue forward. And then as behavior strengthens, we can gradually only reinforce some of the time. And this is really key to making the behavior stable in the long run. But a key warning here, that intermittently reinforced behavior is very, very difficult to break. And this can be a really helpful thing to know when we're thinking about increasing behavior and making desired behavior changes more sustainable in the long run. But it can be really difficult when we think about behavior patterns that we're trying to break out of. And so Tiffany will talk to you a little bit more on that, but definitely see handout 11 and really keep that in mind as we're moving forward towards some practice. Some final food for thought. I'd like for you to take a moment to think kind of what reinforcers are most effective for you personally, and if there are any reinforcers that have been ineffective in your experiencing, either in the way in which the reinforcer was delivered or kind of the reinforcer itself. And when have you been effective in applying these principles to increase behavior, say with your littles or your partners or other individuals in your life, like bosses and things like that? And when has it been challenging to do so? And finally, how might these ideas relate to your diary card targets, the behaviors that you're trying to increase for yourself, and some of your life worth living goals, say with parenting and behaviors that you're trying to increase skillfully in others and those around you? All right. That is all for me, folks. I look forward to seeing you on Tuesday, and thank you for watching our video.